Picture this. You recently bought a home and started your family. The home you recently moved into is an up-and-coming neighborhood. You and your family have become accustomed to your neighborhood and the place you call home. Your children attend the new school built across the neighborhood. After a couple of years of your family living in this developing community, your child starts to develop epilepsy, asthma, urinary tract infections, and low white blood cells. These families were blind to what was to come in the following years. Well, this is what Lois Gibbs' son, Michael Gibbs, experienced. The new community her family moved into was supposed to be a new beginning. Instead, it turned into a mother's worst nightmare. Lois Gibbs, now a well-known environmental activist, became aware that where her children attended school was built directly above the dumped chemical site known as Love Canal. The story begins in Niagara Falls, New York in 1890, where an entrepreneur, William T. Love, wanted to build a new city that incorporated a shipping lane that would bypass Niagara Falls. He began to proceed with this project and had investors. In 1907, the United States had a financial crisis and his investors pulled out. This caused Love to abandon his project. Fast forward to the 1940s, where Hooker Chemical Company bought the canal and the 70-foot wide banks on either side of the canal. The length of their purchases was about 16 acres. The Hooker Chemical Company filled the canal with thick clay walls before they began dumping. The 10 years the company owned the land, they dumped more than 21,800 tons of chemicals. For example, the chemicals were benzene, chloroform, and metal chlorides that are also known as carcinogens. After they decided to sell the land, the Hooker Chemical Company sealed up the canal with a clay cover. The buyer was Niagara Falls School District. Their only condition the company had in the sale was that they relinquished any and all fault. They could not be held liable for anything pertaining to the chemicals that the canal enclosed. The district agreed and bought the property for $1. Before they began construction, the school district was advised by the school's architect that there were two dump sites with 55 gallons of chemical waste, and it would not be in their best interest to create their foundation in that area. The district decided to simply move the schools over 80 to 85 feet. As the schools were completed, they enrolled around 400 students. The land that was not used was sold to the city of Niagara Falls. The city began to construct sewer systems and build low-income and single-family residences. In the process of building the sewage system and the clay wall, and the canal was breached by construction workers. In total, 800 homes and 240 low-income apartments were built. What came after these families moved in was something they would have never imagined. Several families complained about foul odors and black substances that flowed out of the canal. After the snow melted in the winter of 1977, water levels rose, and after testing the water high levels, dioxins were found. The soil alone had the presence of more than 200 distinct organic chemicals. These families complained and protested, and nothing was done to help them. There were children being born with birth defects, or mothers were experiencing high levels of miscarriages. For example, some children were born with an extra row of teeth, cleft palate, learning disabilities, vision problems, and unexplained illnesses. The EPA conducted blood tests on several residents to see the effect that might have had on them, and the results found precursors to leukemia, and 33% were inflicted with chromosome damages. In a normal population, only around 1% would have experienced damaged chromosomes. Lois Gibbs was one of the leaders in her community that led the investigation concerning the recent rise of developing health issues. For 2 years, she tried to convince her city government and anyone listening that the dump site adjacent to their home was the root of all their health problems. And all the while, these residences were unable to sell their homes and move away. Not until 1978 did President Jimmy Carter announce and declare a federal health emergency in Niagara Falls, New York. This was the first time the United States used federal emergency funds for something other than a natural disaster. This, in fact, is what started the Superfund list because Congress passed the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. This held chemical and petroleum industries directly liable for the release of hazardous waste into the environment that could potentially harm public health. There was evidence that when exposure was diminished, so did the effects that some residents experienced. This site was not taken off the Superfund list until the year 2004. It took 26 years to finally clear the area of chemicals that were damaging to public health.